Well, good morning again. It has been a pleasure to share with you guys your MissionFest. Today, I'll tell you a little bit more about how MAF, Mission Aviation Fellowship, works. Tell you a little bit about my Jordan family. And if it weren't for churches like this one and many others around this country, MAF could not do the work that we do overseas. So thank you on behalf of Mission Aviation Fellowship. And if any of you head west on I-84, we're just a mile off the interstate, come see the home that God has given us here in Idaho. It's a great home. My parents went to Ecuador in 1951. They were both musicians, and they worked with a shortwave broadcasting station that broadcast in some 22 languages, 24 hours a day, around the globe. The shortwave signal shot out from the studios, control centers, and transmitter sites in all these different languages. My parents found out shortly after being in Ecuador that they could not have any kids. They had a doctor in Michigan that supported them financially to be able to go overseas. And they got a telegram one day, a telegram that I have on my wall at our house in Nampa. It says, "Adoption assured, come quickly." This doctor had just delivered a baby from a young girl who had just turned 16. And they decided to place that child up for adoption. So my parents went to their mission leadership and said, "We would like to go up to Michigan and pick up a baby." There were 4 guys who were kind of the heads of that mission at the time. And 3 of them said, "Oh, you can't go back to the U.S. You haven't been here for 5 years. A term of service was 5 years. And in 1951, we didn't jet around the world like we do today. But a man named David Stewart Clark said, "Gentlemen, I think we need to reconsider. Maybe God has something for the Jordan family by providing this child." So I think my parents were told, go to Michigan, pick up a baby, come back, and don't have any fun. So they went up to Michigan, picked me up, took me back to Ecuador. So I grew up in the country of Ecuador, on the grounds of a big radio station. I always knew, as long as I can remember, I always knew that down in the jungles of Ecuador was a guy named Nate Saint, and he had a little yellow airplane. Some of you may recall that in 1956, Nate, Jim, Roger, Ed, and Pete, 5 guys, committed to taking the gospel to the Auca people, now known as Waorani. Nate landed his airplane on a small sandbar on the side of the Kudadai River in the Amazon jungle. They made a contact with these people through a trio, an older woman, a younger woman, a young man that came out to the beach to see what were these funny-looking people doing in our territory. A lie was told that these people are coming to kill us and eat us. That got back to the tribe. January 8th, 1956, 7 warriors from the nearest community came to the beach and speared those 5 guys to death. I've always known that story. I grew up with the kids that lost their dads, the McCulley boys, the Saint kids, Udarian kids, Val Elliott. I just always knew about what had happened down in the jungle. During high school, as I got a little older, I would go down to the MAF base on the edge of the jungle, and I would sweep the hangar, I would wash the airplanes when they came back from muddy jungle strips. I would load up loads, weigh them, put them in the airplane, tie them down, fuel the airplane, just being a little hanger rat, always hoping for a ride. And I got a lot of rides through high school and decided that this would be something that God would have me do. I left Ecuador after high school, went through Moody Bible Institute's flight program, did 2 years of Bible school in Chicago, and then flight school in Tennessee. And between Bible school and flight school, I met Lynn. She wanted to be a missionary kid school teacher. And that was great, because everywhere that there's an MAF base, other missions that do different things seem to congregate around there, and then there usually is a missionary kid school. So to have a teacher, that was great. Besides, she was cute. We got married in 1974, joined MAF in 1977, and MAF assigned me right back to Ecuador, where I grew up. So I spent 18 years growing up there and 22 years there flying in the jungle. Ecuador is a big part of my life. I then started to fly into the communities that Nate Saint had started to open up, but were further opened when his sister Rachel and Jim Elliott's wife Elizabeth walked into the tribe and started living with them and told them, "Our husbands did not come to kill you or to eat you. We came to tell you of a God that loves you and cares for you." The Waorani now have a New Testament in their own language. There are people that dearly love Jesus. There are people that want to have nothing to do with the church. And then there are people that play a game. When it's convenient to go to church, they go to church. But if it's better to do this thing, they do that thing. They are no different than you and I. MAF has chosen 3 words: help, hope, and healing, to kind of describe what we do. Help. About a third of the flights I did out in the Amazon jungle were to help the communities. Education, we flew stuff in so they could build a school. We flew teachers in to man the school. We helped with bringing in clean water to a village. We did a lot of things for them to show them that we cared for them in their everyday life. Living in the jungle is hard. Life expectancy was very low. Get bit by a poisonous snake, you might make it, you're probably going to die, unless we can get you to the hospital. We helped the communities. Every community I flew into was near a river. Water is so critical to life. Every community was near a river. As I started flying in Ecuador, I learned that the communities did not name their children, families did not name their children until they were about 2 or 2.5 years old. Why? Easy. A lot of life happened in the river. They swam in the river, they fished in the river, their animals were in the river, they pooped in the river, they washed in the river. Everything happened in the river. And they would take river water and give it to their little babies. And the babies would develop intestinal parasites, they would get diarrhea, they would get dehydrated, and they would die. Why name a kid if it's just going to die? Life is tough. By working with different organizations, they would go into the communities, either dig a well or find a water source that was unpolluted, and bring one spigot into a community of maybe 80 to 120 people, and teach them, drink this water, not the river water. Well, why? We've always drunk the river water. Yeah, I know, but the river water has bugs in it. I don't see any bugs. Yeah, but we have these eyes that can look inside of water. Drink this water, play over there, bathe over there, fish over there, whatever, but drink this water. And that didn't happen overnight. Miriam Gebb was a community health worker. I flew Miriam 1,000 times, patiently teaching the people about hygiene and about clean water. And over time, they learned if our children drink this water, they live. And as missionaries came in and started teaching them about who Jesus was, and he said, I am the water of life. I am eternal life. Started to be a connection there, because the people would say, we used to drink that water and our kids died, and now we drink this water and they live. We need to find out more about this Jesus. So about 1/3 of my flights were helping communities. Help, hope, and healing. We did a lot of medical emergency flights, and I've already told you that we launched a lot of flights for snake bite. Second most normal reason that we would do an emergency flight was for problems with childbirth. I got a mother giving birth, the baby's not coming, she's been bleeding, let's go get her. Last night, for those of you who are here, I told you that the country of Ecuador was shaped kind of triangular, like a piece of pie. And just picture in your mind a piece of pie, but it's broccoli pie, because the jungle looks like broccoli when you're about 2,000-3,000 feet over it. I was out in the point of the pie, heading back toward the crust of the pie, because the crust was the Andes Mountains that came down to the jungle, and our base was right where the mountains quit being mountains and the jungle started being jungle. I was out in the point of the pie, and I had not quite an hour's flight home. And it was a very different flight because there was nobody else in the airplane. We never flew empty, cargo, people, whatever, but I had delivered some supplies out to a mission station. We did a weekly run of vegetables and stuff for them. I had a bunch of empty baskets in the airplane, and I was headed home. An empty Cessna 185 gets off the ground very quickly. It climbs very quickly, and pretty soon I was up at 8,500 feet, cool for the first time in the day. Down in the jungle, it's hot and humid. At 8,500 feet, it's cool. The weather was gorgeous. I could look up there, I could see the mountains. I knew by this snowcap and that snowcap that our base was about right there. This was pre-GPS days, and I was headed home. The airplane's like, go back to the barn. It knew its way home. About halfway home, I got a radio call. Gene, can you go to the community of Kuchansa and pick up a patient? I don't want to go to Kuchansa. It's hot down there. I'm cool up here. I'm headed home. Come on, guys. But that's why we're there. I turned the direction of the airplane and started down. Kuchansa was not the best airstrip we flew into. It was sloped. It went downhill. Most of the time we could land uphill, and that's no problem because you get slowed down fairly quickly. But because of the winds and the little valley where it was, sometimes we had to land downhill. And a downhill landing is a little trickier because you have the strip is falling away from you, so you have to put the airplane on, get it on the ground, and then hope you get stopped while you're rolling downhill. I flew over the community of Kuchansa. The power was back. I was basically just gliding. I looked down. Now, I was already grumpy because I had to leave 8,500 feet. And now I got more grumpy because I looked down and said, I have to land downhill. So I did. I plastered the airplane on, got stopped, turned around, added power, taxied up to the top of the airstrip, turned the airplane around, shut down, got out, took the door off the airplane to put a patient in, and there was nobody there. And it's like, did I get the wrong airstrip? No, they said Kuchansa. And about the time that I thought that nothing was happening, a young man walked out of the jungle, and in his hands, he had a brand new, just born, premature baby. It was all gooey. Didn't look that good. It would not live if it stayed in the jungle. They would take it, wrap it up in a banana leaf, and put it out in the jungle and just leave it there. But because this young man, who was a health promoter, he had learned a little bit of first aid type stuff from missions and from the government. He called the airplane. I landed there. He had this baby to go out to the hospital. Now, if you flew with me, I would put a lap belt on, shoulder harness, show you how they all tie together, adjust the air coming in, lock the window, first aid cap, barf bags, give you all this. But this child was that big. What do? I can't put it in the seat. This young man cut down some young banana tree leaves. When they just pop out, they're very soft. Made a pile about this big in the bottom of the basket, put the baby in the basket, put the basket beside me, and I tied it down, and I took off out of Kuchansa. This time, I didn't go up to 8,500 feet. I went just above the treetops, because I looked at this precious little child beside me, and its chest was just heaving for air. Tiny, tiny, tiny little fingernails. A lot of black hair. Just looking at that thing. Trees are okay. Cute little baby. Trees are okay. Called the hospital. They had the van there waiting. The baby went to the hospital. The baby lived for a month in an incubator. Temperature controlled, humidity controlled, feeding controlled, and it started growing. It got out of, and I shouldn't say it, I should say she, got out of the incubator and spent about 6 weeks with a mission family. Not ready to go back to the jungle, but okay to be out of the hospital. So another 6 weeks with a mission family, and they cuted this little thing up with little clothes. And just the way the flight rotation happened, I was able to fly the baby back. This time I wasn't grumpy. I got to land uphill. And I did thousands of flights in Ecuador. I've forgotten most of them. But this one I will never forget, because I got to give this young mother her child back and just tell her everything's okay. I will never forget that mom's face. I kept track of that little girl for 4 or 5 years and then lost track of her. But because MAF was there, she was given a chance at life. Help, healing, and hope. Eternal hope. Another airstrip in Ecuador, about 80 miles straight east of our little base, is a place called Moretecocha. Cocha in that language means water. Charapacocha, Yanchamacocha. This was Moretecocha. The morete was a very tall, very straight palm tree that went straight up. And so this place is by the waters where these palm trees grow. It was a flat airstrip, but about a third of the way in, it bent to the left. A dogleg strip, we called it. You couldn't land straight. You had to land, touch down, and then kind of go around the corner. It was plenty long. It was very narrow. It had a crown in it. It rained a lot there. They built the airstrip so it went like this so the water would drain off of it. But in an airplane, if you got off to the left, the slope would want to drag you to the left. If you got out to the right, it'd drag you to the right. You needed to stay right down the middle, but it was a good airstrip. I was on weekend duty, and I got a call. Can you come pick up a patient in Moretecocha? Sure. Blasted off, landed in Moretecocha, rolled to a stop. There's a lot of people there, got out of the airplane, popped the door off, put a patient in on the floor, and a young man named Ensequa showed up. Moreta Cocha had had evangelistic work for quite a few years with a man named Lloyd Rogers. Lloyd had gone in there carrying the message of Jesus. That community was ruled by a witch doctor that hated Lloyd. He hated anything to do with the gospel. He communed with the spirits. And he told Lloyd, "I'm going to kill you." And Lloyd said, "The God that I love and loves me is more powerful than the spirits you fear and hate you." And Sekwa came. I recognized him immediately. He was a son of the witch doctor, and he had accepted Jesus. Ruined the relation with his dad, but he loved the Lord. And in his arms, he was carrying his daughter, who was about 10 or 11 years old. He said, "Capitan, my daughter is sick. Can we take her to the hospital?" "Sure." And Sekwa, "Get in the airplane." Put him in the seat behind me so that he could hold his daughter kind of sideways in his arm. She stretched out across the airplane, slapped the door back on the airplane, did a quick walk around to make sure everything was okay, taxi to the end of the runway, turned around, added power to take off. Now, in flight school, they taught us that an engine is going to fail on your first power reduction. You take off with full power, you get up about 250, 300 feet, and you pull the power back gently. The engine is rated for so many minutes at full power. And generally, if the engine's been working real hard to take off and you change that, if something's going to break, it does. And so as you make your first turn away from the airstrip, you reduce the power, you're ready for something to happen, because if it does, you just keep the turn going and land back from where you just came. The second thing that they taught us to do was, in this turn, get in the habit of looking out behind the wings, the trailing edge here and over here, because if you had fueled from jerry cans or from whatever, and the fuel caps weren't on well and you were streaming fuel, you just keep the turn going and land back where you were, fix them, and keep going. The third thing was to look back at your passengers and make sure that they were okay. Nothing was going wrong there. So I took off from Moreta Cocha, reduced the power. Nothing happened. You guys thought the engine was going to quit, didn't you? It didn't. No fuel was leaking. Looked back at Sekwa. He was good. Headed to the hospital. Called the hangar with my estimate, my altitude, the people when we'd get there. Please have the van from the hospital come. And we had about a 30-minute flight. 12 minutes into the flight, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was Sekwa, and tears were streaming out of his eyes. He said, "Capitan, my daughter has died." "What?" "Sekwa, what?" "My daughter has died." "Sekwa, are you sure?" "Yes, Capitan, my daughter has died." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "And Sekwa, do you want to continue to the hospital or do you want to go home?" "I want to go home." Turn the airplane back. The Indian communities, they're sharp. When an airplane comes back that soon, they know something's wrong. I knew that there would be a lot of people at the airstrip. And so I planned that when I touched down, I'd reach over and pull the mixture control and cut the fuel to the engine so that by the time I rolled to a stop and I was where the people are, the propeller would be stopped, not turning. I didn't want anyone to get anywhere near that thing when it was turning. I rolled to a stop, reached over, popped the door open, hands reached in and took the daughter out, and the wailing and crying started. And Sekwa jumped out of the airplane and everybody disappeared into the jungle. And I'm there kind of stunned. It happened so fast. I walked around the airplane checking everything before I took off very slowly because I was not really thinking about the airplane. I was thinking about Sekwa and his daughter that he just lost. I got in the airplane. We have a checklist that we run through, and I went through every step twice, slowly, because I was not thinking about the airplane. I was just about ready to shut my door and go home. and I felt a tap on my hip, and I looked over, and it was Ensekwa. And he said, Capitan, I am sad, but I am not without hope, because I believe that I will live forever with Jesus. And my daughter believed in Jesus, and she is alive with him now. So I am sad, but I am not without hope. He disappeared. I took off, headed home, and I wept all the way home. Got home, put the airplane in the hangar, because I had two girls, Kim and Kelly, that were about the ages of the little girl that had passed away. Went home and hugged them real tight. Dad, you're squeezing me too hard. I'll never, ever forget that flight. Because Ensekwa learned, and the people of Moretecocha learned, that there's a God that loves them and created and gave his son for them, and they believed in it. I told you a few minutes ago that I had been adopted into my family in Ecuador. My parents went up to Michigan, picked me up, took me to Ecuador. As the internet became something toward the early 90s, I found a website called adoption.com. And you put your information in and see if anybody else connects with it. Nobody did. I was at a small group Bible study, and a verse out of Isaiah was read where it says, the prophet says, can a mother forget a child that she has given birth and life to? And the answer is no. She does not forget that child. And then God goes ahead through the prophet and says, but even if she could forget, I will never forget you. God talking to his people. I thought, I wonder if my mom ever thinks about me. I petitioned the courts in Michigan to release my adoption records. Most of the time, people ask because they want to know the health history. What did my parents have? How is that going to affect me? I got a letter from a judge, and he said, why should I release your adoption records? I wrote back, I said, I'd like to find my mom, thank her for giving me life, and telling her I had a wonderful upbringing. She never would have found me. I was in the jungle in Ecuador. I can tell this much faster than it happened, but eventually I got a letter back, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine who lived in Michigan. We had grown up together, and he was kind of watching this process work its way through the court system. Got a call from him late one night, and he said, Gene, I've got good news and bad news. What do you want? I said, well, give me the bad and follow it by the good. He said, no, I'll give you the good news first. Why did you ask me? He said, I just talked to your grandmother, your real grandmother. You have 3 sisters and a brother. The bad news is that your mother died about 3 years ago from breast cancer. Your father died 45 years ago, an alcoholic. But you have 4 siblings, a grandma, and some aunts and uncles. Wow. In 2000, MAF asked us to leave Ecuador, which we did not want to do. I did not want to do it, and come back and work in our headquarters. And as part of that process, we flew up to Miami, and we were going to drive from Miami up to Minnesota. We stopped in Lexington, Kentucky to meet one of my sisters. And she said, she worked in a college. Why don't we meet at lunchtime? There's a Burger King off the interstate. Let's meet there. So Lynn and I pulled off the interstate, went in, ordered something. And I'm watching people come in the Burger King, and it's like, no, probably not. No, probably not. Yeah, I sure hope not. When she walked in the door, I knew immediately that that is my sister. And so we had about 2 hours together and talked a little bit about our upbringings. We continued up to Minnesota and then out to California to headquarters. I had another sister, Joni, that lived out in LA. We had Joni over at Christmas time to our house. Our girls were home. We read the Christmas story like we did when they were little growing up. And at the end of that, Joni said, "Is that story in every Bible?" She had grown up in the U.S. She had grown up, now was living about a block and a half from an evangelical free church, and she had never, ever, ever heard the gospel. She also told me, "I never remember my mother telling me she loved me. I never ever knew how much my mom did love me and told me that all the time." So I was in Ecuador growing up. My parents were missionaries there, broadcasting the gospel message around the world. I went back to Ecuador, flying into Moretecocha and Yanchamacocha and Arajuno and all these places, telling the people of God that love them. And my own sister, Joni, in the U.S. had never heard the gospel. In Revelation 7, verse 9, and I love that you read verses after that this morning, it's just perfect. John says, "I looked out as far as I could see people dressed in white, palm branches in their hands, and they were crying out, singing, 'Salvation comes from God and the Lamb.' And they were from every tongue, tribe, and nation." That's what MAF wants. But you know what? We chose to go to Ecuador. We felt God would have us go there. Joni didn't hear the gospel a block and a half from a church. So you guys aren't off the hook. There are people here that don't know about a God that loves them. You don't have to go to Ecuador, to Venezuela, to Congo, to Sumatra. Everybody needs to hear about Jesus and have their lives changed for eternity. I referenced the killing of Nate Saint, Jim Elliott, Roger, Ed, and Pete as I started. I want to teach you guys a word in the Waorani language. And that word is waponi. Waponi. If I meet you on the trail and I'm asked, "How's it going?" I'm going to say waponi. That means everything is okay. Waponi. But if I meet you on the trail and you say, "How's it going?" and I go, "Waponi," and I make the word that long, that means I have killed a very big pig and we are all going to eat very well tonight. So, waponi, everything's okay. Waponi, something good has happened. Minkai, one of the 7 men that speared the 5 missionaries to death, became a firm believer in Jesus. He loved him deeply. I was sitting in my office at MAF and I got a text message from Ecuador that said, "Minkai died early this morning." And I don't know why, but I pictured for that moment that Minkai was no longer present here, face to face with Jesus, and he wraps his arms around him and says, "Waponi, waponi, waponi." And Jesus says, "Minkai, welcome to your forever home. Welcome to your forever jungle. Go check it out." And Minkai turns around and there's 5 men waiting there. And they say, "Minkai, last time I saw you, you were running a spear through my belly. Come give me a hug." That's what MAF is about. We're not about airplanes. We use airplanes, but we use them to tell people about a God that loves them and deeply cares for them by giving his Son. And that's the challenge for the church, for this church and for all churches. As you celebrate MissionFest, thank you for allowing us to be a part of it, of telling people the good news. Thank you.
Father, we thank you for this time. God, we thank you for the privilege of gathering together, where we can come here, Lord, free of persecution, come here to worship you, to learn more about you, to learn more about what you are doing among the nations. And God, we thank you for your promises that people from every tribe, tongue, and nation will be gathered into your kingdom. And God, we thank you for the privilege, Lord, of being the means by which you have chosen to bring people in. Lord, we know that you are sovereign, you are in control, you are the King, you are Lord. And yet you choose weak, feeble people who rest upon your strength to boldly proclaim truth to people that are lost and currently in darkness. And God, we thank you that you will overcome hearts and minds that are lost. Lord, you will call people to yourself. Lord, we can understand and know that the power is in your word, in your truth being preached and proclaimed to the ends of the earth. Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.